Now this is one of the best, strongest, and fastest Whirlwind Earthquake Barbarian build in Season 8. With this build you can easily push high tier pits and speed farm any content in the game. This build can easily destroy any uber bosses, and I'm not using any uber unique. And this build focuses on damage, survivability, and speed to easily clear the hardest content in the game. Now this is an endgame build, so you'll need to have specific gear and will need to masterwork your gear to push the highest tier pits and quickly speed farm dungeons. And I highly recommend you to watch this video from the beginning to the end to see how everything synergizes. So let's check this out. So first I'm going to show you clearing a tier 80 pit. I can easily speed farm high tier pits, gaining tons of experience and glyph levels. And this build is so strong it can easily destroy huge groups of enemies and melt any uber bosses. Now this is a similar build to the pure earthquake build that I made, but I made changes to incorporate whirlwind, which is really strong for speed farming. You can start this build in difficulty torment 1, and I have a build in the D4 build planner for torment 1 in the description below. Now even though our main skill is whirlwind, the main source of damage coming from this build comes from creating earthquakes. We can easily create earthquakes by using our rune set. Now this build does require a legendary rune, which is the Bach rune, but this rune is rare and hard to find. So if you don't have the Bach rune, then I shared an alternate rune you can use in the meantime, and it works just as good. And once you get the Bach rune, you can switch your rune set around. But I'll go over the alternate rune set you can use if you don't have the Bach rune in another section in this video. And all our other skills and gear will be used to increase our earthquakes damage and for survivability. So just be aware that we are not using our other skills for damage, because the earthquake is our main damage, and we want to mainly increase our strength with this build because of the legendary aspect, the executioner's aspect. This legendary aspect will greatly increase our earthquake's damage the more strength we have. Now this build does require several unique gears for maximizing our damage and to cap out our elemental resistance, but if you don't have any unique gears, I have shared some alternate legendary gear you can use until you get the unique gear in the D4 build planner. And we are using a lot of legendary aspects to greatly increase our earthquake's damage, and I will share different build layouts depending on your situation in the D4 build planner in the description below. This build includes many skills and gear that complement each other, offering a lot of powerful combinations. I'll cover everything in more details in their dedicated sections. So next for the skills, the core skill I'm using is Whirlwind, and this is our main skill we're going to use to speed clear areas. Now the main purpose for Whirlwind is to activate our boss powers and to go through enemies so we can easily use our rune set to create earthquakes, and the boss power we are using will increase our earthquakes damage. The next skill I'm using is Ground Stomp, and this skill will smash the ground, damaging and stunning surrounding enemies. Ground Stomp will also reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill, and because of the legendary aspect, the aspect of earthquakes, you will also create earthquakes when using Ground Stomp. The next skill I'm using is Rallying Cry, and with this skill you will shout, which will increase your movement speed, resource regeneration, and grant you unstoppable. Rallying Cry also grants you Fortify. Now the main reason we're using Rallying Cry is to gain unstoppable and gain Fortify, because when pushing pits there are a lot of enemies that can crowd control you. The next skill I'm using is War Cry, and with this skill you will shout, which will greatly increase your damage and grant you berserking. The next skill I'm using is Challenging Shout, and with this skill you will shout that taunts enemies and gains you damage reduction. Challenging Shout will also increase your maximum life and gain you fury when you take damage, so this skill is really good for defense and survivability. And the last skill I'm using is the ultimate skill called the Ancients, and this skill will summon 3 Ancients that will aid you in battle. This skill will also increase your attack speed and damage. Now we are mainly just taking this skill to gain the additional damage when using the ultimate skill. Okay, so next for the weapon expertise. Now I do want to mention that you can easily max out all your weapon expertise by going to the training room and hitting the training dummy. And for the weapon technique, you want to use the two-handed axe expertise to greatly increase your vulnerable damage. Okay, so next for the boss powers. Now the main boss power I'm using is Wandering Death's Chest Beam, and with this boss power, when using Whirlwind, you will spawn a beam that deals damage, and enemies hit with this boss power take increased damage from you. So this boss power will greatly increase your earthquakes damage. Now for the modifiers boss power, the next boss power I'm using is Harbingers of Hatred's Volley, and we are just taking this boss power for the second part, which will greatly increase our vulnerable damage. We are not using a basic skill with this build, so you can ignore the first part of this boss power. The next boss power I'm taking is Hatred's Embrace Haste, and this boss power will greatly increase our critical strike chance, making our critical strike chance to be almost 100%. And the last boss power I'm taking is Blackmail or Sabotage, and this boss power will grant you a barrier whenever you gain Fortify. So this boss power is really good for defense and survivability, and this is the only way we can gain a barrier for our legendary aspect, the Conceited aspect, which will greatly increase our damage when we gain a barrier. Okay, so next for the mercenaries. So for the higher mercenaries, I chose Subo, and this is the path I took. One of the main reasons I chose Subo is because of the skill Seeker, which will reveal enemies around you. This skill is really good to easily locate groups of enemies to destroy them. Then I headed left and took Wire Trap, which Subo will place a trap on the floor that slows enemies. Then I chose Ready at Hand, which will increase your movement speed. Then I chose Cover Fire, which Subo will shoot a volley of arrows that slows enemies. And lastly, I chose Opening Fire to increase my critical strike damage. And for the reinforcement, I chose Rahir and chose the skill Crater, which Rahir will strike the ground 3 times. Each burst will deal damage and pull in enemies. The final burst will deal additional damage and stun enemies. And this skill is really good for grouping up enemies for your Earthquake. And Rahir will use the Crater skill when you use the skill Call of the Ancients. Okay, so next for the skill tree. Now this is an endgame build, so you'll need to have unique gears and boss powers to maximize your damage and synergize with your other skills. But I have shared alternate builds depending on your situation in the D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the basic skills, I put 1 point into lunging strike and a point into enhanced lunging strike. And we just need 2 points in the basic skill to get to the next skill path. Next for the core skills, I put 1 point into whirlwind, a point into an enhanced whirlwind, and a point into furious whirlwind. Now we're using whirlwind to activate our boss powers and go through enemies, so we can easily use our rune set to create earthquakes. And the boss power requires a channeling skill, which will increase our earthquakes damage. And then I put 1 point into pressure point, and this will give you a chance for your core skill to apply vulnerable to enemies. Next for the defensive skills, I put 1 point into ground stomp, a point into enhanced ground stomp, and a point into strategic ground stomp. And this skill will smash the ground, damaging and stunning surrounding enemies. Ground stomp will also reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill, and because of the legendary aspect, the aspect of earthquakes, you will also create an earthquake when using ground stomp. Next I put 1 point into rallying cry, a point into enhanced rallying cry, and a point into strategic rallying cry. And with this skill you will shout, which will increase your movement speed, resource regeneration, and grant you unstoppable. Rallying cry will also grant you fortify. Next I put 1 point into challenging shout, a point into enhanced challenging shout, and a point into tactical challenging shout. And with this skill you will shout that taunts enemies and gains you damage reduction. Challenging shout will also increase your maximum life and gain you fury when you take damage. Next I put 3 points into imposing presence, which will increase your maximum life. And then I put 3 points into martial vigor, which will gain you damage reduction against elite enemies. Next for the brawling skills, I put 5 points into war cry, a point into enhanced war cry, and a point into power war cry. And with this skill you will shout, which will greatly increase your damage and grant you berserking. Next I put 3 points into booming voice, and this will increase your shout skill effect duration. And then I put 3 points into guttural yell, and this skill will cause enemies to deal less damage to you when you use your shout skill. And then I put 1 point into ray leader, and this skill will heal you when you use your shout skill. Next I put 3 points into aggressive resistance, and this will gain you damage reduction while berserking. And then I put 3 points into prolific fury, and this will increase your fury regeneration while berserking. And with this build you will be berserking all the time. Next I put 3 points into swiftness, and this will greatly increase your movement speed. And movement speed is important for this build to quickly speed farm areas, and also activating the Bach rune to create earthquakes. Next for the weapon mastery skills, I put 3 points into pit fighter, and this will increase your damage to close enemies and gain you damage reduction. And then I put 3 points into slaying strike, and this will increase your damage to injured and healthy enemies. Next I put 1 point into thick skin, and this will gain you fortify whenever you take direct damage. And then I put 3 points into counter offensive, and this skill will greatly increase your damage when you're fortified for over 50% of your maximum life. Next for the ultimate skills, I put 5 points into Call of the Ancients, a point into Prime Call of the Ancients, and a point into Supreme Call of the Ancients. And this skill will summon 3 Ancients that will aid you in battle. This skill will also increase your attack speed and damage. Now we are mainly just taking the skill to gain the additional damage when using the ultimate skill. And the reason I put 5 points into Call of the Ancients is just to reduce its cooldown. And with this build you have tons of stats that reduce your Call of the Ancients skill, so you can have Call of the Ancients active all the time. Next I put 3 points into heavy hitter, and all the other points I'm getting to heavy hitter is coming from our temper stat on our weapons, and this skill will greatly increase your earthquakes damage. Next I put 3 points into heavy handed, and this will greatly increase your critical strike damage when using two-handed weapons. And then I put 3 points into wall up, and this will greatly increase your damage if the enemy is stunned or vulnerable when using a bludgeoning weapon. And last but not least, for the key passive, I put a point into unconstrained, and this states berserking damage bonus is increased by 60%. While below 65% life, you are always berserk and gain a 30% physical damage reduction bonus. And with this build you'll be berserking all the time, so this key passive will greatly increase your damage. Okay, so that's the full skill tree layout for this build to easily destroy huge groups of enemies and melt bosses while having tons of survivability. And this build can easily clear the highest tier pits, and I'll have this full skill tree layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Okay, so next for the gear. Now this is an endgame build, so you'll need to temper your gear and fully masterwork your gear in order to push the highest tier pits and to quickly speed farm dungeons. And with this build, I am not using any uber uniques. Now this build does require several unique gears to greatly increase our damage, but I'll share an alternate gear if you're missing some gear in the D4 build planner. And on most of your gear, you want the stat strength because of the legendary aspect, the executioner's aspect, which will greatly increase your earthquake's damage based on your strength. Now I didn't get the best greater affix stat and masterworks on the gear I'm currently using, but in the D4 build planner, I shared the best greater affix stat and what stat to masterwork for this build. And I'll have the full build layout and alternate build layouts depending on your situation in a D4 build planner linked in the description below. So starting with the helmet, I'm using the unique helmet, the ugly bastard helm, and the only stat we care about on this helmet is plus ranks to aggressive resistance and plus ranks to prolific fury, and the other two stats don't matter. And you want to masterwork aggressive resistance to gain defense and survivability, but the main reason we're using this unique helmet is because of the unique aspect, and it's only the second part of this unique aspect, which states you deal 98% increased fire damage, because we're using a legendary aspect, the aspect of incendiary fissures, which will convert our earthquake's damage into fire damage. So this unique helmet will greatly increase our earthquake's damage. Next for the chest piece, I'm using the unique chest piece, the Mantle of Mountain's Fury, and the only reason we're using this chest piece is because of one stat, which is chance for earthquakes to deal double damage, and you want a triple masterwork chance for earthquakes to deal double damage. Now we're not using the skill Hammer the Ancients, so you can ignore the unique aspect. Next for the gloves, I'm using the unique gloves, the Fist of Fate, and the stats it has is attack speed, critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, and lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. And you want a triple masterwork critical strike chance, and these unique gloves are strong because it's a way to make enemies vulnerable. And the unique aspect states your attacks randomly deal 1% to 300% of their normal damage, so these unique gloves can greatly increase your earthquake's damage. Next for the pants, I'm using the unique pants, the Reed's Bearing, and the stats it has is maximum life, ultimate damage, resistance to all elements, and Call of the Ancients cooldown reduction. And ideally you want a double masterwork resistance to all elements and masterwork once maximum life, and these unique pants are really good because it also has Call of the Ancients cooldown reduction, and the unique aspect will just basically increase the damage of your ultimate skill Call of the Ancients. Now the main reason we're using these unique pants is just for the stats. Next for the boots, I have fury per second, movement speed, and plus ranks to Warcry, and for the tempering stats I have movement speed and earthquake size, and you want a triple masterwork plus ranks to Warcry. And the stat fury per second is good because it'll allow you to cast Whirlwind in the beginning of dungeons, and the legendary aspect states lucky hit, damaging a bleeding or vulnerable enemy has up to a 33% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. Now this build does have a lot of lucky hit chance because of your unique gloves, and your Whirlwind skill will make enemies bleed, so this legendary aspect will easily stun enemies, which is really strong for survivability. Next for the weapons, now for the two-handed bludgeoning weapon, I have strength, maximum life, and critical strike damage, and for the tempering stats I have damage while berserking and plus ranks to heavy hitter, and you want a triple masterwork plus ranks to heavy hitter. And the reason you want the tempering stat damage while berserking is because of a legendary node on the Paragon board, the Blood Rage legendary node, which will greatly increase your damage based on your damage while berserking bonus. And for the legendary aspect, it states Ground Stomp creates an earthquake, damaging enemies for 2379 physical damage over 4 seconds. While standing in earthquake for 4 seconds afterwards, you deal 112 increased damage. Your earthquakes deal 112% increased damage. So this legendary aspect will create an earthquake when you use Ground Stomp and greatly increase your earthquake's damage. Next for the one-handed weapon, I'm using a one-handed sword, and the reason why is because of the implicit stat critical strike damage. And for the stats I have strength, maximum life, and critical strike damage. And for the tempering stats I have damage to close enemies and plus ranks to heavy hitter, and you want a triple masterwork plus ranks to heavy hitter. And the reason I have the tempering stat damage to close enemies is because of a legendary node on the Paragon board, the Force of Nature legendary node, and this legendary node will greatly increase your earthquake's damage based on your damage to close enemies bonus. And for the legendary aspect, it states your overpowers will spawn an earthquake every 4 seconds that deals 2606 physical damage over 4 seconds. Your earthquake damage is increased by 5% for every 100 strength you have, up to 200%, current bonus 200%. Now we only care about the second part of this legendary aspect, which will increase your earthquake's damage based for every 100 strength you have. So this is the reason you want strength on most of your gear, so you can greatly increase your earthquake's damage. The next one-handed weapon I'm using is a one-handed sword, and the stats I have is strength, maximum life, and critical strike damage. And for the tempering stats I have damage to close enemies and plus ranks to heavy hitter, and you want a triple masterwork plus ranks to heavy hitter. And the legendary aspect states casting an ultimate skill increases your damage by 27% for 8 seconds, gain 2 additional ultimate skill ranks. And with this build you can always cast your ultimate skill often because you have a lot of cooldown reduction for your ultimate skill, so this legendary aspect will greatly increase your damage. Next for the two-handed slashing weapon, weapon, I'm using a polearm because it has the implicit stat vulnerable damage, but you can also use a two-handed sword if you like. And the stats I have is strength, maximum life, and critical strike damage. And for the tempering stats, I have damage to close enemies and chance for earthquakes to cast twice. And you want a triple masterwork chance for earthquakes to cast twice. And the legendary aspect states your earthquake deals 116% increased damage, and their damage is converted into fire. So this legendary aspect is important to greatly increase your earthquake's damage and to convert your earthquake's damage into fire, so it can pair with our unique helmet. Next, for the amulet, I have percent strength, total armor, and plus ranks to heavy-handed. But instead of total armor, you want plus ranks to pit fighter or something else, because with this build we don't need the stat total armor, and this is just the best amulet I found as of right now. And for the tempering stats, I have Call of the Ancients cooldown reduction and damage while berserking. And you want a triple masterwork plus ranks to heavy-handed. And the legendary aspect states deal 42% increased damage while you have a barrier active. And because of our boss power, the blackmailer sabotage boss power, we can easily gain a barrier, and this legendary aspect will greatly increase our damage when we have a barrier active. Next, for the rings. Now for the first ring, I have strength, maximum life, and critical strike chance. And for the tempering stats, I have Call of the Ancients cooldown reduction and damage while berserking. And you want a triple masterwork strength. And the legendary aspect states whenever you cast a shout skill, its active cooldown is reduced by 25% per nearby enemy up to a maximum of 70%. And this legendary aspect is important to have your shout skills active all the time. Now for the second ring, I have strength, maximum life, and critical strike chance. And for the tempering stats, I have Call of the Ancients cooldown reduction and damage to close enemies. And you want a triple masterwork strength. And the legendary aspect states Whirlwind leaves behind dust devils that deal 754 damage to enemies in their path. Enemies hit by dust devils take 25% increased damage from all of your other sources for 3 seconds. And with this legendary aspect, we only care about the second part, which enemies hit by dust devils take 25% increased damage. And with this build, you will be using Whirlwind all the time, so we will easily create dust devils. And when enemies are hit by dust devils, it will greatly increase your earthquake's damage. Okay, next for the runes and gems. And I do want to mention that the main purpose for one of the rune set is to create earthquakes, which will deal huge damage to enemies. And you want both the rune sets on your two-handed weapons, because we want to use gems on our armor pieces to gain our primary stat, strength, which will increase our earthquake's damage. So for all the armor pieces, I'm using ruby gems to increase my strength. And on the first two-handed weapon, I'm using the Bach rune and Tech rune. And this rune set will create earthquakes when you travel 5 meters. But I do want to mention that if you don't have the Bach rune, I shared an alternate rune set you can use, which is just as good, in another section in this video. And on the second two-handed weapon, I'm using the Neo rune and Claw rune. And the Neo rune will activate the Claw rune when you avoid taking damage while fighting. So this rune set will greatly increase your movement speed, allowing you to cap out your movement speed, which is really good for the Bach rune to create more earthquakes. And with this build, you will have high mobility and tons of crowd control, so you will rarely be hit, allowing you to maintain the uptime of the Neo rune and Claw rune effectively. And on the one-handed weapons, I'm using emerald gems to increase my critical strike damage. And on the jewelry, I'm using diamond gems to increase my resistance to all elements. And I do want to mention that you always want to use potions and 3 essence to greatly increase your stats and increase your experience gain. So for the potion, I'm using the elixir of precision 2, and this will greatly increase my critical strike chance and critical strike damage. For the incense, I'm using ancient times, which will increase my strength, redamine buzz to increase my maximum life, and soothing spices to increase my maximum resistance to all elements. And checking out my stats, I have 2658 armor, which is above the armor cap of 1000. And checking out my elemental resistance, all my resistance is capped out. And if you checked out my movement speed is capped out at 200% because of the rune set I'm using. And lastly, if you checked out my critical strike chance, I'm at 93.3%, so you'll basically critical strike almost all the time. Okay, so I did showcase a build layout to easily clear high tier pits and also for speed farming dungeons. Make sure you masterwork your gear, as it's crucial for significantly boosting your stats. And this full build layout and alternate build layouts will be in the D4 build planner linked in the description below. Okay, next I'm going to go over the best rune set and alternate rune set for this build. Now the two best rune sets for this build is the Bach rune and the Tech rune, so you can create earthquakes while moving. And then Neo rune and Claw rune, so you can greatly increase your movement speed when you're not taking damage. And with this build, you will have high mobility and crowd control, so you should rarely be hit, allowing you to maintain the uptime of the Neo rune and Claw rune effectively. And because of your high movement speed, it'll trigger your Bach rune more often, allowing you to create tons of earthquakes. Now the Bach rune is rare and hard to find, so the best best alternate rune set you can use if you don't have the Bach rune is to use the Neo rune and Tech rune until you get the Bach rune. And because this build has high mobility and crowd control, you can easily use the Neo rune to activate the Tech rune to create tons of earthquakes. Because with this build, you should rarely get hit because of your high speed and tons of crowd control. And for the second rune set, you want to use the Pak rune and Qua rune. And the Pak rune will activate the Qua rune when you spend your primary resource, which you will do all the time when using Whirlwind. And the Qua rune will greatly increase your movement speed. And having tons of movement speed helps you clear areas very quickly, making it great for speed farming and clearing any content quickly. Okay, so next for the Paragon board. Now this is a fully optimized Paragon board for this build to push the highest tier pits and also for speed farming any content in the game. And I do want to mention that it is very important to level up your glyphs, as your glyphs will greatly increase your damage. Now the Paragon board in the D4 build planner will have all the important nodes you will want, but I'm not going to use all the Paragon points because everyone has not maxed out their Paragon level. But if you have extra Paragon points, then you want to add more strength or more damage. Now I'm going to quickly go over this Paragon board, going over the important nodes and glyphs. But I'll have this full Paragon board layout in the D4 build planner in the description below. So starting with the starter board, I'm using the Wrath glyph, and this glyph will greatly increase your critical strike damage. The next Paragon board I'm using is Blood Rage, and the glyph I'm using is Rumble, and this glyph will greatly increase your earthquakes damage. I'm also using the legendary node Blood Rage, and this states killing a bleeding enemy has a 10% chance to grant berserking for 5 seconds. Your damage is increased by 10% of your damage while berserking bonus up to a maximum of 45%. Current bonus 45%. Now we only care about the second part of this legendary node, which states your damage is increased by 10% of your damage while berserking bonus up to a maximum of 45%. So this is the reason you want to get the stat damage while berserking, because this legendary node will greatly increase your damage. And I did split this Paragon board into 2 directions. So first heading left this way, and the next Paragon board I took is Force of Nature, and the glyph I'm using is Ire. And this will greatly increase your damage while berserking, and you'll also take reduced damage from elites while berserking. I also took the legendary node Force of Nature, and this states your earthquakes have a 75% chance to spawn a dust devil every second that deals 1429 damage. Earthquake damage is increased by 40% of your damage versus close bonus up to a maximum of 200%. Current bonus 200%. So this is the reason why you want to get the stat increased damage to close enemies. Then heading back to the Blood Rage Paragon board and heading right this way. The next Paragon board I took is Decimator, and the glyph I'm using is Territorial, and this will greatly increase your damage to close enemies, and you'll also gain damage reduction against close enemies. And the legendary bonus will increase your damage to vulnerable enemies. I also took the legendary node Decimator, and this states each time you make an enemy vulnerable, your damage is increased by 20% for 5 seconds. Overpowering a vulnerable enemy grants an additional 20% bonus for 5 seconds. So this legendary node will greatly increase your damage when you make enemies vulnerable. Then heading up this way, and the last Paragon board I took is Weapons Master, and the glyph I'm using is Challenger, and this glyph will greatly increase your damage to elites. I also took the legendary node Weapons Master, and this states swapping weapon grants you 8% of your maximum fury. You deal 30% increased damage to injured and healthy enemies. Now all we care about is the second part, which states you deal 30% increased damage to injured and healthy enemies. So this legendary node will greatly increase your damage. And I do want to mention that you do want to take all the rare nodes and magic nodes that increases your maximum life for defense and survivability. And depending on your stats, if you don't have enough elemental resistance or armor, you can take rare nodes and magic nodes that increases your elemental resistance or armor. And it is really important to level up your glyphs to get the additional bonus and legendary bonus, because leveling up your glyphs will greatly increase your damage. Okay, so that's a fully optimized Paragon board for this build for maximizing your damage and survivability. And you want to level up your glyphs to get the additional bonus to greatly increase your stats. And if you have extra Paragon points, then you want to get either more strength or more damage. Now I'll have this full Paragon board layout in a D4 build planner in the description below. Okay, so thanks for checking out one of the best, strongest, and fastest Whirlwind Earthquake Barbarian build in Season 8. With this build, you can easily push high tier pits, speed farm dungeons, and melt any uber bosses. With this build, you should have maximum damage and survivability to clear the hardest content in the game. This is a really fun and easy build to play. Now I'll have this full build layout and alternate build layouts in the D4 build planner in the description below. Hope this helps, and more Diablo 4 videos to come, so stay tuned. And of course,